It was brought to my attention that we met 3 times in 2019, 2 times in 2020, and this is our first meeting in 2021. The members, or some members anyway, have expressed a desire to meet quarterly and to discuss solutions to groundwater issues they are experiencing. As we're all aware, the water situation in Arizona has not improved over the past couple of years, making these discussions even more important. We've attempted to reserve approximately 30 minutes at the end of today's meeting agenda for discussion of the committee's goals and the next steps, including meeting dates. In that discussion, I think we should be cognizant that this committee is an ad hoc committee charged by council to identify groundwater issues, with council even providing a list of topics to be considered and to make recommendations for solutions. The list of topics was actually posted on the ADWR's website with today's meeting materials. Perhaps Jenna can even put a link to those materials in the chat box. So in light of our tight time schedule, if we could stay focused on the agenda, I think it would be beneficial. And with that, I turn it over to Jenna to discuss webinar logistics, and then to co-chair Griffin to summarize her legislative successes for us. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everybody. I did just put a link in the chat to today's meeting materials, and I'm going to quickly go over webinar logistics. So if everybody could please stay muted when you are not speaking, that is helpful for audio feedback. If you would like to speak, please put your name in the chat. You can also put comments or questions in the chat, and I will read them if you prefer that. Please make sure to message everyone in the chat when you do so. And if you would like to speak, you can, of course, unmute yourself and please state your name when speaking. And the chat and meeting are being recorded. And if you have any technical difficulties today, there's contact information for ADWR's help desk at the bottom of this slide. And that's all I have. So looking forward to today's meeting.
Great, thank you, and welcome to our meeting. And I will be doing a short wrap-up of legislative affairs in reference to water and what we were able to accomplish this past year. It was a very successful year. We had, we'll go to the first slide. We had over $200 million that we put in water projects. And so we did the Drought Mitigation Revolving Fund. We appropriated $160 million. Next slide. And that $160 million will be overseen by a board representing appointments from all over the state, and the appointments are from the governor, Senate President, Speaker of the House. It creates grants to ADWR to facilitate the forbearance of water deliveries up to $10 million. State Land Department up to $10 million for best use of water resources on state trust lands. And low-cost long-term loans for planning, designing, constructions, and for projects to import water supplies to Arizona. So that's new wet water coming into Arizona. It'll tie in with, could be desal, could be floodwaters from eastern area of the country, could be snow mountain front recharge. And I think the presentations today will be very rewarding in what all we can do locally in our different areas. Next slide, please. The Water Supply Development Revolving Fund, it's $40 million. Represents, for the first time, permanent funding that we received. Projects outside of AMAs up to $1 million per project. Something similar to what Cochise County has done. The Horseshoe project that many of you have seen it was a $2 million project, $1,900,000 for private funds that made the match to make that a $2 million project. It also increased from 100,000 to 200,000 grant for planning and designing water supply systems. It also allowed for stormwater recharge projects, macro water harvesting projects like what we're going to be looking at today, plus other areas that we've talked about previously in Cochise County. It allowed for municipal water delivery systems, public water systems, the NRCDs, Natural Resource Conservation Districts, and counties for less than 300,000. The 160 million went to larger areas. 80% of the population lives in those larger areas. 20% lives in rural Arizona and outside of active management areas, and that's how that figure was done. Also, another $6 million went to the study for imported water to Arizona. Next slide, please. Additional appropriations, we funded the Arizona Water Protection Fund annually. We've been funding it about $250,000, and so we added $1 million to that. So it's 1.25 million, and $350,000 to the Department of Water Resources to study the hydrology for the Agua Fria River in that particular area. Next slide, please. Other water conservation tools. We had more than two bills, but the two bills that we'll be going over today was for water conservation, obviously. Conservation plan is to be filed with the Department of Water Resources, and you don't have to use all the water that we're doing, and so by allowing this conservation form to be filed with the department, it addresses and exempts the abandonment or the forfeiture of water. Those forms can be filled every 10 years or up to 10 years, again, can be refiled. The other one, 2441, allows someone to permanently retire acreage and substitute it for the same amount of acreage on adjoining land. This is what I called my rock bill. If people are concerned about losing their water right and they continue using water that they don't have to, but it limits their production of their farm, for instance. So if it's damaged, if the land is damaged by flood or a limited condition, then it would qualify for the specific criteria. Next slide, please. Healthy forest, as you know, our national forests were set aside by the federal government for water and economies. And so we did some really good things for forestry. 1442 is an existing program to remove hazardous vegetation. And when you remove the buildup fuels and vegetation, hopefully it will not burn and waste all that resource. And so using inmate labor is what has been done and will continue to be done. The next year's budget appropriates $3 million to the Department of Forestry and Fire Management, removing hazardous vegetation, in addition to $784,400 that we've spent for inmate firefighting crews. In addition to that, we had a special session to address forest management, and $75 million went to wildlife emergency and response efforts to address not only the fires, but post-fire flooding, and $25 million for wildlife mitigation efforts, including vegetation removal. So the Department of Forest and Forest Management is working on acquiring the equipment and get everything in order, and we'll have an update on that process to you soon. So that's all I have right now. Like I said, it was a very successful session, and we look forward to working next session to adding funds to these, more monies to these funds. So thank you. Any questions? Seeing none. Jamie, you're on.
Okay, Jenna? Is Jenna there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Am I introducing the speakers or are you introducing the speakers?
Take it away, Jamie. We'll start with Keith and we'll go to Nick.
Okay, our first presenter is Keith Nelson. He's ADWR's Senior Research Hydrologist. For those of us that attend a lot of these meetings, we've seen presentations from Keith before, and we welcome receiving today's presentation.
Well, thank you, Ms. Kelly and Representative Griffin and committee members. As was just mentioned, about 2 months ago, I gave a presentation to the Augmentation Subcommittee on the potential for enhanced or informed recharge in the state of Arizona. And really the upshot is to this whole process is, you know, the idea of getting more natural recharge into the ground really before it evaporates. And so I sort of took a two-bullet approach. One was a proof of concept, and where I discussed how the city of Nogales and other water users in the Santa Cruz Active Management area, with a complete understanding or a near complete understanding of how the groundwater flow system works, they can complement operating their wells in a manner that works with the patterns of the natural hydrologic system with the hydrology. And then as the other bullet point, I selected the Prescott AMA as an area where I think, and many other folks think, that natural recharge can be enhanced. Currently, there's a fairly significant long-term overdraft in the Prescott AMA, and we believe that we can take a pretty serious bite out of that overdraft. Next slide, please. And so what sort of predicated the previous presentation was my intrigue with the number 98%. 98% of the precipitation that falls, only 2% of it makes it into the regional scale groundwater flow systems. And I've heard that number, but until a couple months ago, I actually didn't do the calculations myself. I'm somebody who likes to do the calculations themselves, kind of cut out the middleman. And sure enough, for various areas of the state, you know, the needle is pegged pretty much on 98%. And it seems somewhat scale independent. For example, I came up with 98% in the Prescott AMA, and then the United States Geologic Survey's very large regional scale groundwater flow model of northern and central Arizona, it came up also with 98%. And I came up with that with Wilcox. And then I asked some of my modelers who are currently working on draft versions of the Tucson and San Pedro model, and they also came up with 98%. So there really seems to be some real gravity to that number. But then I did the same calculations for the Santa Cruz Active Management area, and I came up with 89%. So what we see in Santa Cruz, largely due to induced recharge and getting precipitation under the ground quick, we see recharge efficiency rates that are 5 times greater than most other regional scale groundwater flow basins in the area. So next slide, please. And so why am I doing this? Again, many of our regional scale groundwater flow basins in the state are in a state of overdraft. The numbers vary, but you can either look at net change in storage values through modeling, or simply just look at observation data. that shows many of these areas in serious decline, and some of these areas are outside of the active management areas. Next slide, please. And so I'm going to real briefly tell you how the city of Nogales gets such high rates of efficiency. So they operate 2 well fields. One is the Potrero well field, which is more of a classical, typical groundwater basin. But even that system exhibits patterns of periodic recharge as well. So historically, they've gotten 50% of their water out of the Potrero well field, and then the other 50% comes out of the Santa Cruz well field, which is a very narrow but highly efficient aquifer that is subject to periodic flood recharge. And the city of Nogales prefers to remove water from their Santa Cruz well field for a number of reasons. First is cost. The lifts are less. The water quality, of course, is outstanding. Occasionally they have arsenic considerations in Potrero. And then the more they can pump the Santa Cruz well field, that provides more of an opportunity for the water levels in the Potrero Basin to recover. And so by modulating pumping with the understanding of the hydrologic system, they're able to achieve what I consider a long-term dynamic equilibrium situation. There are some areas outside the inner valley that might be experiencing a slow, chronic, long-term decline, but those budget components are relatively small. Most of the action, most of the groundwater demand in the Santa Cruz AMA are within the Santa Cruz River Valley itself. Next slide, please. And I think this slide pretty succinctly illustrates the induced recharge concepts we speak of. So we have sort of a Tres Rios situation where flows from the Nogales Wash and flows from Sonoita Creek and other tributaries such as Agua Fria, they meet their confluence with the Santa Cruz River in a location which is extremely conducive to groundwater recharge. We see extraordinarily high infiltration rates associated with floods. And so it's sort of the collection of these different watersheds that all converge toward this inner valley, which experiences extremely high hydraulic conductivities. Many of the wells in that area, very shallow wells, can produce 2, 3, 4, 5,000 gallons a minute with effectively no drawdown. So it's effectively surface water, but it's really better than surface water because it infiltrates quickly and precludes or reduces by a significant amount evaporation. And then we also get the added benefit of soil aquifer treatment. So it's almost as if the groundwater flow system is sort of hedging its bets, because the bread and butter for flood recharge in southern Arizona, it really is the monsoon, including the occasional decaying tropical storm. So that's really the bread and butter. And we all know monsoons are very localized, and you know how the rain is distributed over space. So for example, in 2006, the monsoon raged in Cochise County and eastern Santa Cruz County, and most of the flows came in through the Sonoita Creek tributary. But then several years ago in 2017, the monsoon really seemed to focus southwest of Nogales. And so we saw most of those flows coming in from Agua Fria and the Nogales Wash. So it's almost like the groundwater flow system is hedging its bets. It can collect water from these different areas, and it all gets converged into an area that readily and very efficiently accepts flood recharge. And so that figure on the hydrograph on the right side of the screen shows surface water flow in blue, and then groundwater levels at a nearby observation well. And you can see the unmistakable relationship between flood periods and recharge as it occurs. And there are other areas in the state that experience similar induced recharge conditions. We see that in the Buckeye waterlogged area, where hydrologic conductivities are extraordinarily high and waters very efficiently are recharged into the system. And then also up in the Safford area, we see a similar situation. And those are both very intensive groundwater withdrawal areas. On the same order as a place like San Simon or Wilcox, but we see a very different response in the aquifer, where in Wilcox, in San Simon, we have a situation of groundwater mining. Here, water withdrawn from wells are basically are based on induced recharge principles. So thank you. Next. And this is just a slide to show you what's happened since I gave my presentation a couple months ago. This is a 5-year snapshot, and you can see in red what's happened in the last couple months. It was an active monsoon, as we all know, across the state, but in southern Arizona, these sort of monsoons are pretty typical, and we see this a lot. And what's interesting about this slide is you can see what happened or what didn't happen in 2020. We had the monsoon, and you can see there was effectively no flood recharge, but we came roaring back this year, and we're back to better than we were before. So that's how these systems operate. And this system really has qualitatively been understood for many hundreds of years. So what we've done with data collection and modeling, we've really just quantified that qualitative understanding. And I always like to point out that, the first European settlements in what is now the state of Arizona, and also this happens in northern Sonora, really, the establishment of these settlements was really predicated on understanding, these patterns and these rhythms in the system. Next slide, please. And so an area where some of us think we can make some good progress regarding ratcheting back the overdraft is in the Prescott active management area. Again, currently the long-term overdraft rate is it's about 7,000 acre-feet a year. So that's every year. So if you accrue that, that's a large net change in storage. What the data and modeling tells us is that about 2/3 of the natural recharge that occurs in the Prescott active management area occurs along ephemeral and intermittent tributaries, primarily Granite Creek and Lower Lynx Creek, and then the Agua Fria River below the confluence. And then about 1/3 occurs in the form of mountain front recharge. So really the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, would be to get water in the tributaries that are known to have high infiltration rates. And so last time I briefly mentioned the work of a civil engineer named Doug McMillan, who's done an extremely detailed amount of work studying soil columns, and he's basically came up with the same conclusions independently as I have in the groundwater flow models. So, and just a quick aside about groundwater flow modeling in general. When we develop these models, what's important is for us to understand what we call them parameters, which parameters are important and which parameters are not. So we can have thousands of active cells. Each of these active cells may have multiple hydrologic properties and characteristics and stresses and sinks. But among all those thousands, really the data only, even with a well-constrained model like Prescott, it really only allows us to constrain perhaps say 40 or 50 parameters. And among those parameters, maybe 10 or 12 are really important. They really provide the foundation of the whole groundwater flow system. And recharge along Granite Creek, it's not one of the most sensitive parameters. It is the most sensitive model parameter. So, so it was important in the evolution of the groundwater flow system, both pre-development and post-development. And that also means that, as we proceed in time, that recharge along Granite Creek will continue to be important. Or conversely, if we don't get recharge along Granite Creek, that will also be important because the upper aquifer will not receive the recharge required. So anyway, Doug, this is just a hypothetical situation, proposed conveying water from areas where we both know empirically and through modeling, recharge does not occur, conveying the waters to places like Granite Creek. Next slide, please. And then since the last presentation, I reached out to some folks up north And there's also, I haven't really been too involved with Prescott AMA issues, notwithstanding the recent activity getting the model out the door. So I haven't really been aware of what's been going on, nor have I been informed, but I reached out and I found out that some of these groups up there are doing some very good work on more of a local scale. The Upper Verde River Watershed Protection Coalition, which consists of different entities, Prescott AMA, Yavapai County, the Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe, City of Prescott, Town of Chino Valley, and the Town of Prescott Valley. And I know the water managers for some of these areas, and they're experts in the local knowledge, and I have a lot of respect for them. And you know, having them, you know, at the table making these decisions is absolutely imperative. And I highlighted a tag they had on one of their sites. The coalition has recently adapted a stormwater initiative that will work to unify stormwater management approach among the coalition members with a focus not only on public safety, but to allow stormwater to recharge the aquifer rather than disposed as a waste product. And amen to that. I live in Ahwatukee, and I can't drive 5 minutes from my house without seeing water sitting in retention basins. So they're doing some good work up there, and perhaps we can hear about some of their work in the future. Next slide, please. And this is one of my last slides. So as we move forward, in terms of regional scale groundwater flow modeling, really the holy grail of model parameters is really natural recharge. In a sense, it's a residual. If you have a well-constrained model, you can have confidence in some of those numbers. And so I've been working on these models for many years. And, you know, as we move forward, it's important for us to identify the different types of natural recharge: mountain front recharge versus mountain block recharge versus tributary recharge versus main stem recharge. And the figure on the left in yellow, I think sort of illustrates, to me anyway, the difference between a groundwater flow system where, you know, surface water flows are converged to basically a linear stretch like we see in the San Pedro. And then that is contrasted significantly from Wilcox, which is in the middle, and San Simon, which is on the right side of the screen, where modeling and data in no uncertain terms tell us that most of the recharge does occur from mountain front recharge. So understanding these mechanisms are, in my opinion, very important for us moving forward to understand what's going on, because we can't solve a problem without really understanding it first. Next slide, please. Okay, well, I'm going to introduce Nick Hunt. I've been working in water resources and hydrology for a long time, and it takes a lot for something to catch my attention, but I was involved with some meeting in the Northwest Basins, must have been a couple of years ago, where I heard Mr. Hunt talk about enhancing natural recharge, and it was like a bolt out of the blue. And I was so impressed that I had Karen Modesto find his contact information. I called him to talk about what they have going on there, and they're doing some outstanding stuff, and they seem to be ahead of the curve. So I think maybe this is a good place for me to introduce Nick Hunt, a professional engineer. I believe you formerly worked for the city of Kingman, but you can clarify that for me. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Mr. Hunt.
Thank you very much, Keith. Should I just go ahead with the presentation, or wait?
Yes, please. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Keith, for the kind words. I actually worked full-time for Mojave County for a long time, and then I'm working part-time, and my focus is on the water supply, and especially the groundwater issues. So with that, please advance the slide. So I will talk about Mojave County's efforts on doing enhanced recharge of stormwater in the Wallapai Valley Basin specifically. We are most concerned with that because of the city of Kingman, And this first slide just shows the major northwestern basins, groundwater basins and aquifers for Mojave County. And the Wallapai Basin is huge. That's just one on the right upper part of the slide. The other are the detrital and the Sacramento basins. They have similar issues, but we are not focusing on those yet. So please advance next slide. So this is a focus. This shows just the Wallapai Basin, and just to get located, as you can see, north is the Colorado River and Lake Mead, of course, and the Wallapai Basin itself has 3 sub-basins, and again, I'll be mostly focusing on the Kingman sub-basin, which is the most southern part of the basin, and it's surrounded by mountains. And this is important because that's where most of the surface water comes from. And that surface water is available for enhanced recharge. I call it, in my terminology, I came up with enhanced infiltration, stormwater infiltration, but either way, that's the same idea. That on the south, we have the Wallapai Mountains, the west, the Sorbet Mountains, and the east, the Peacock Mountains. And we're trying to capture the major washes. And instead of, and I have to steal a really good quote from Keith, where he said it, instead of disposing the stormwater as waste, we try to enhance the recharge and put it back in the aquifer. Next slide, please. And just really quickly, I want to go through the numbers, what the problem was in Mojave County when we realized it. So in 2011, the USGS finished a major hydrology study, and so it became clear that we had a annual water deficit of 5,600 acre feet. As you can see, the inflow into the aquifer was 9,900, the outflow 15,500. So the difference is the annual deficit. Now, this deficit didn't worry us too much because we still had water for 400 or 500 years. And if I may say that that became clear that water, the groundwater, was put there in the Ice Age, and we're just using it up. But we had water for very, very long time, so we didn't worry about it, but already had a deficit in 2011. That's what I wanted to point out. And then large agricultural developments came, and by 2016, that deficit increased to 37,600 acre feet. Now that was a major worry because the time frame that the water is available now, it's shortened quite a bit. Next slide, please. So again, I really appreciate what Keith said about natural recharge, because that's what I'm focusing on too. That as Keith said, that 98% of precipitation is lost to evaporation. That's in average in other areas, but so this is true in our areas too. And so when the USGS finished that study, the county and the city hired them to do further studies. So we collected data for that and talked with the farmers, and we flew the area, and we came up with some estimate for the water demand in the following year. So in 2019, actually we have a pretty good number. That's 26,000 acre feet was used by agriculture. So it's actually a little less than was 2016. but it's still a big number. But based on just what the farmers told us and what they published in the newspapers, the water demand was going to increase in 5 years to like 79,000 and then over 100,000 in 10 years, 100,000 acre feet that goes out. And so again, these numbers were estimates in 2019 based on the data that we had at that time, what the farmers told us and what we saw in publications. But the real issue is that the natural recharge remained only the same. It remained only about 5,700 acre feet, and which is you can compare the numbers from over 100,000 going out and only 5,700 going back in. So we have a major issue. And so we started thinking about mitigating measures. Next slide, please. So the mitigating measures that we did, as I mentioned, Mojave County and teamed up with the city of Kingman, but the county is managing the project. We contracted with the USGS to do a major hydrology study, do the best study available. They ran the mud flow hydrology study and did really detailed data collection. So that's probably the best available data that we could get. And the study that the final report has been published. I put up a link to it. That's in blue, and basically it's accessible. And the other thing that we started doing is to slow down the use up of our groundwater resources is started I called it a stormwater infiltration program, or we can name it Enhanced Recharge program, either way, through the flood control district. So next slide, please. So just to finish up the USGS model, that the main purpose of the model was just to establish what we have, but also to provide an engineering tool. And so actually the USGS will train the county technical people, and we'll be able to run the study in-house because, like I mentioned, the estimates for water use or water demand by the farmers, it changes every year. Their business plan changes every year. And what we'll be able to run the study to the actual conditions. And actually, we can give it to the farmers too. We can do it for them, so everybody can see what our future is. And what this tool will tell us, it will tell us what's the impact of the pumping, what are the anticipated timeframes for the drop of groundwater levels. In our area, the water level drops. It's not like in the Nogales area where there's a major fluctuation like Keith pointed out. We have a huge aquifer, but what we anticipate is the water level will keep dropping slowly. So we just want to slow it down. And then want to see the impact of the mitigating measures, which is again, the enhanced recharge. And the enhanced recharge will not solve the problem, will not stop the groundwater level decline, but it will certainly slow it down. And so that's our goal. And Mojave County will provide input further to the study. And like I pointed out, we are going to be able to run it in-house. The only reason we can't do it right now because of the COVID and the federal government, their employees are not coming to train us, but as soon as they can, they will. Next slide, please. So a lot of people ask, why is the flood control district doing that at the county? Because there is a dual benefit. These recharge basins are basically detention basins that eliminate or reduce the flood hazard and erosion repairs, road repairs. And I will show some projects where we actually can tap into funding for that. And the secondary benefit is, of course, to facilitate the recharge into the aquifer. And so we came up with just 3 different methods for enhanced infiltration. And of course, there's a difference in cost, and there's a huge difference in cost. So the cheapest way, or the most cost-effective way, of course, is the shallow spreading infiltration basins. And again, I go back what Keith pointed out. If we catch the water at the mountain blocks, just at the foothills, we have a high infiltration rate just because of the soil types. We have rocky, gravelly, sandy soils, free draining that we call engineering terms. And so the water goes down by itself. So all we have to do is create a basin. And then as we go down towards the valley floor, the soils became more fine-grained soils. That's how we call them. But basically, it's siltier and clayier. So as you can imagine, they don't infiltrate as well. The hydraulic conductivity is much lower. And then when you get down to the valley floor, it's practically watertight. So as we go down somewhere between the valley floor and the mountain blocks, we can do deeper infiltration basins. I will show some projects. We can do dry wells. And then once we get down to the valley floor in our area, it's a very thick clay layer on the top. It's basically watertight. So we need injection wells that will carry the surface water all the way down to the groundwater. So next slide, please. And I just showed some sketches of the different methods, so you can visualize it. The shallow ponds are on the upper left side. It's very easy. Just basically dig a hole and build a berm, and then maintain it, and the water will go down by itself. The dry wells or Verde zone wells work well, also a lot cheaper than the injection wells, but the Verde zone wells are uncontrolled, so we don't know how fast the water will reach actually the water table. The water table is relatively deep in our area. It's somewhere between 400 to 900 feet, so it's uncontrolled. Now the injection well is the most expensive, of course, but it carries the water all the way down to the water table, so it's controlled. We know what we're doing, and I will show an example. The city of Kingman is doing that. Next slide, please. So again, going back to the geology, I talked about it, I think, enough that basically our basins, all of our major basin and range basins are the similar type. It's just a bedrock, basically. You can compare it to a bowl filled up with alluvium, and water is in the pore spaces in the between the particles, and we just have a limited amount that we can pump out. And in our area, the alluvial deposits range from 1,000 to 7,000 feet, and the water is somewhere between 400 to 900 or sometimes deeper. Next slide, please. So the natural recharge, again, I want to emphasize that people ask me too, just like Keith pointed out, that all the water goes back to the groundwater anyway, so why do you need all these projects? Well, that's just not the case. And again, I wanted to point this out again, and just as this slide shows, where the water falls on the mountain block, that's where the recharge occurs, and it further gets down to the very floor that is more fine-grained soils, and most of it just evaporates. And actually, a large amount, like Keith pointed out, 98% iron ore. In our area, we know that the recharge is in the range of 5,700 acre feet, and then the anticipated discharge in the future will be over 100,000 acre-feet. So you can compare the numbers. So that is the reason. That's why we need the enhanced recharge and enhanced infiltration. Next slide, please. So when we create a project, I want to be practical from an engineering standpoint and go through some projects and what do we do in Mojave County, what we're trying to do. First, we need to look at the legal criteria, of course, and check on the potential surface water right allocations, and then also to check on the federal regulation waters of the United States. So in the Wallapai Valley, we are lucky in that point because we checked and there is not too many, very minimal surface water right allocations. And from a technical standpoint, we can argue that this is a closed basin. It doesn't, the surface water doesn't discharge to the Colorado River, so it doesn't fall under the U.S. water designation, but that's a technical argument. So then what we do, we basically locate the major washes, like I pointed out earlier, in the hills surrounding the basin, and then find suitable properties along the washes. And of course, suitable, we want to look for free properties, and that's what we have been doing, either county, city, BLM, or private property donations. And then we make just a rough engineering assessment of the water quantities, and then the geotechnical properties like the soil types, infiltration capacity, and then and come up with a feasibility and cost of construction. Next slide, please. So I don't want to bore you too much with the engineering work. I just wanted to put up that slide. That's typically the steps that we have been taking, the site hydrology, and then again, geotechnical engineering, kind of decide on the suitable infiltration method, and then evaluate the geometry and do a conceptual design, engineering cost estimate, and then do a cost benefit evaluation and see which project is the most beneficial that we advance. The next slide, please. So far, we created 11 areas. It's not 11 projects because some of these projects contain many others. But I just wanted to put this up, and this is what, it's limited how much water we can capture. And I always said that this is not going to be a solution to the problem, but it sure will help. And these are the 11 projects that we're pursuing. And then for the remaining of the time, I want to go through some project examples and show how we develop the project and what's the benefit. Next slide, please. So the first one is the most beneficial, probably, that it's almost completed. The city of Kingman is putting it in. They budgeted for it. And this is the most costly method, but the most beneficial. They basically are recharging a portion of the treated wastewater. And there is more to recharge, but they're doing for a portion. So they put in a injection well, and that's very costly. It's about $1 million. And then the entire project with all the other contingencies and piping, pumps, so forth, it's 1.6 million. And system recharge is designed for a recharge capacity of 1,200 acre-feet per year. And it doesn't sound too much, but that's about 15% of the Kingman's average annual water demand. So that's a pretty good step. And then, of course, there is potential to do more. So I applaud the city of Kingman for doing that. Next slide, please. So this is another small project that within the city of Kingman that is completed. And we helped the city, the county helped the city. We designed that project, and it's already built. The city put it in. As you see on the picture, there was a large detention basin, and the way it functions, that captures the water that runs down from the Wallapai Mountains. And so the water goes to waste. It either evaporates or they release it and it goes down to the city streets and basically damages the city streets when there is too much water. This was filled up once about 10 years ago. And I wondered what happened, and the kids played with it and they put a plywood over the discharge and over the outlet, and then so it could not discharge. Now, city pulled the plug, and what happened then flooded the streets. So that gave me the idea that why don't we just recharge that water? So instead of this outlet, we put in a little recharge facility. Basically, we did a geotechnical boring. We looked at the soil types, and then we found that have to go down about 15 feet or so, and then it will. Then we find some sandy soils that will infiltrate well enough. So we dug a hole, pretty much filled it up with gravel. Of course, we designed it with filter fabrics, and then the city installed it. So in the future, the water, instead of running down the streets and damaging the streets and causing damage, will go back to the water supply. And when I say it's damaging the streets, actually, even in the county portion, part of that stormwater causes so much trouble. Since I worked for the county many times, we had to close down roads. And I'm going to show a project that we did for that. So next slide, please. So to go further, there are 3 subdivisions that are just below the Wallapai Mountain block. The 2 of them, the city regulations were good enough. They already made them put in detention basins. As you can see, just one of them on the left upper corner, a large detention basin. It's just sitting there, and it lets the water go to waste, let it to evaporate. Now, what the city is doing already, they're budgeting every year, and they're putting in dry wells into these detention basins, so turning them into an infiltration basin. And instead of the water evaporating, it will go back again to the aquifer. And this area has probably a couple of dozen available projects. Next slide, please. I just threw this slide in to show when we do a detention basin, we try to stay below the dam jurisdiction, so there's less regulations on it, which is the berm, if it's less than 25 feet, or the storage capacity is less than 50 acre feet, then it doesn't fall into the dam jurisdiction. But it's not that critical. If it becomes a dam, we still can deal with it. It's just more regulations and more annual inspection. The maintenance is pretty much the same. Next slide, please. So these are the red circles are the areas. This is an aerial photo. It shows has the hydraulic model, the flow 2D model overlain, and you can see the washes, and by the color you can tell how deep the flow is on each one of them. The blue is the least amount, and then when you get into the green and yellow, those are the high amounts of flows. And those are the areas we try to capture. And again, this is where those little detention basins are, where the red circles are. Or the Wallapai Foothills Estate, there is no detention basins. That was before the regulations, but there is plenty flood control right away. So it's very easy to put in a small detention basin. And I identified about 23 good potential for project sites. And again, the city is going step by step and installing a few every year. They're putting dry wells in. Next slide, please. Another project example, we thought on private property. Most people know the city of Kingman has development agreements to put in freeway interchange, the Rattlesnake interchange, and there's a major wash that goes nearby through there, the Rattlesnake Wash. It again carries the water from the Wallapai Mountains, and so there's two ways to handle the issue, either by channels and flood control or large basins. So it's not worked out yet, but I'm talking with the city and also with the developers that are already large gravel pits there that pretty much act like large basins, and the bottom is just gravel because it's a gravel pit. It will just infiltrate by itself. So we're trying to piggyback on it. Once this development takes place, the developer will donate those properties that they use for stormwater control, and hopefully we get those gravel pits, and then all we have to do is enlarge them or maintain them. Now, next slide, please. I will show you the hydrology. So we did some hydrology work on it and see how much water can we retain, and then the basin D, that's the one those are already large gravel pits that would be available just to turn into detention or infiltration basins. Basin E, we talked with the contractor, they may want to do it themselves later on for flood control purposes. And the basins A, B, and C, that's a good example. Those are on BLM property. And so the county is already in the process of obtaining those properties from the BLM. And we filed the application. And so when we get those properties, so if just build some of these basins, maybe not all of them, that will solve the flood control problem or reduce the severity of the flood control problem, but turn the water into groundwater, recharge it to the aquifer. Next slide, please. So we did similarly on the west side of the Kingman subbasin in the Sorbet Mountains. So we looked at BLM properties, looked at state property, and also private property on land. And just this is on a feasibility level, we evaluated how much can we capture and recharge. So these are projects that we can pursue if we get funding or get the properties. Next slide, please. This is an example I threw in that we haven't pursued, but there is a potential for obtain funding for it. This aerial photo shows the Kingman High School, and on the left side of the photo is Bank Street, which goes from north to south, and this is one of the roads that gets flooded frequently when there are major storms in the Wallapai Mountains. And since I work for the county almost annually, there was an occasion we had to close the road down, which is a major problem because the high school is there. So the Public Works Department, the County Public Works Department, considered the project putting a storm drain all the way under Bank Street to carry the water and reduce the flooding. So they asked me to review the plans, and the idea came up that why don't we go to the high school and to the state and obtain land for ball fields, and we could use these ball fields, turn them into detention basins. They do this in California all over. And then at the corner of the ball field, we can put in an injection well. Now, the problem with this project is that this is done at the valley floor, so there's a thick clay layer on the top, so we will need a deep well. It's either a dry well or injection well, but it could be certainly done for the same amount of money that a long storm drain could do it, and it would accomplish the same purpose. So we intend to work with the Public Works Department and hopefully pursue this project that instead of spending the money of storm drain, put it in a detention basin and injection well, and if the high school would agree to that, then we could create a project. So I just wanted to show this as a potential funding source. Next slide, please. And again, another funding source. This project has been done actually. This was done by the Mojave County Flood Control District. North of Kingman, there's a nice development, Verde Vista, where outside of Valley Vista, north of Valley Vista, there is only dirt roads. And one of the major roads is California Street that is shown on the left side drawing. Every time there's a bigger rainstorm, the road gets washed out and people just can't go home until the road department goes out and fixes it. So the flood control district put in a detention basin. We were able to obtain a property very reasonable, as it's shown on the slide, and basically detain the water there instead of running down all the way on the road and flooding everybody and washing out the dirt roads. And it's actually already constructed and it works. Now, what we are doing, we're gonna piggyback on it, that we're gonna put in either a dry well or dig a deep hole again, and then just a gravel pit, and then recharge the water instead of letting it evaporate there. So again, the project was done with the Public Works and Flood Control District. They're funding. The detention basin is already there. So the cost will be just for the dry well or the recharge gravel pit. The next slide, please. And my last project, I just wanted to show project examples. Again, people ask that, oh, can it be done? Or well, we did a project back down in the Mojave Valley area. And I don't know, Chairman Kelly might be familiar with that. This is the Quail Run subdivision. And the subdivision was done back in the 60s, early 70s, when there were no flood control regulations. So people didn't build on it then, but then now they're building nice homes and a nice development there, but there is no stormwater drainage. So back in the past 10 years, I worked at the flood control district. They got flooded twice, but flooded really bad. There was water in the garages and in the houses, and the reason being because it's flat like a pancake. It doesn't. It's a very little grade towards the Colorado River, and the flood control district looked at it, and we couldn't come up with a good solution, because putting in a storm drain towards the Colorado River would have been really costly, miles, and a very flat area. So it would have been really difficult. So the idea came up that we do a recharge basin. So we did evaluate the geotechnical conditions. It turned out there was a clay layer in the upper 2 feet, but below there's a good sand layer. So all we have to do, dig a hole, fill it up with gravel, as you can see. We put it in, and we actually bought 2 parcels there and put it in. And that was done back in 2012, and they haven't got flooded since. So this is exactly the same recharge. It was before we started these projects in the Wallapai Basin. This is not to supply the groundwater supply, but it's exactly the same concept. It works for flood control purposes. It was done a simple project, and it's been working. So this was my last slide, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think to stay on track, we have about 10 minutes or so, maybe a little less, for questions. So I'll just start at the top. Donald Bills said how susceptible or shallow spreading basins to evaporation versus infiltration in these areas?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we designed these infiltration basins that they will infiltrate within hours or at least in days. So the evaporation is not a major problem because otherwise, if we didn't do the infiltration, it would sit there for weeks and evaporate. So it's a more of a rapid process. The infiltration it's a lot faster than the evaporation.
Okay, the next comment is from Ron Doba. He said he had a question, so Ron, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Jenna. Yes, I did have a question. Actually, it was for Keith with regards to the some of what we heard about the Prescott AMA. And of course, Keith mentioned the 7,000 acre feet of annual overdraft that the Prescott AMA is experiencing. And I'm wondering if anyone has looked at the numbers and the actual precipitation that's taking place in the area, considering the 98% of evaporation that we saw in his presentation, and made a determination of how much of that 7,000 acre feet of overdrafted groundwater could actually feasibly be recovered.
Yeah, it's sort of a complicated hydrologic system. The most productive aquifer in the Prescott AMA is the fractured vesicular lower basalt unit. We call it the lower LVU. But in order for recharge to occur, it has to infiltrate first and recharge the upper UAU and make it down to the LVU. So the plumbing is rather complicated. And historically, the pressure head that existed in the lower volcanic unit aquifer, the recharge really comes from Granite Creek. The Little Chino is it's a rather odd bird in that we see the main drainage for the subbasin occurs through Granite Creek, but the town of Chino Valley and the areas around Del Rio Springs is actually lower. So it's that infiltration along the creek that ultimately translated from an elevation head to a pressure head over time. And so again, my numbers are derived from a regional scale groundwater flow modeling. And so we don't really have pinpoint accuracy on where explicitly recharge occurs. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not, but you know, from drop to the groundwater, it's again, we look at this as like a field equation, and it systemically provides an energy head. And so ultimately we know that the waters that recharge the most important productive aquifer have to infiltrate and recharge the UAU and then eventually slip underneath the aquitard to the lower volcanic unit.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Yeah, I was actually, wondering just if we did have an idea of how much of that 7,000 acre feet we could recover through projects that would be feasible for building. And I know that we saw about the coalition that is formed up there to look at these types of projects. You might not be the right person to answer this, but we may have a member of the coalition in the meeting with us. And I was wondering if the coalition is looking at any of the Water Supply Development Fund dollars to get any projects going in that area to increase recharge. And there may not be anybody in the meeting that can answer that, but I'll just float it out there for a minute.
Ron, this is John Munderlow.
Yes, John.
Yeah, we'll be looking at those funds. Particularly, we want to build a comprehensive plan first, so that we understand really what we are going to build. So that'd be our first step, and we need funding for that.
Is the coalition itself eligible for those funds, or would one of the participants have to apply for it? Do you know?
The town of Prescott Valley is the fiscal agent for the Upper Verde Coalition, okay. So it'd be the town that would apply.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, there's still a couple questions in the chat. Keeping in mind what Jamie opened the meeting with, that we want to make sure we have time for all agenda items, I'm going to defer to the chairs if we want to continue with questions, or if you would like me to note these and send them along to either Nick or Keith to answer personally for the folks that still have questions. I'll defer to the chairs.
I think you can give another 5 minutes to the questions and we should be able to get things done.
I agree.
Perfect. Okay, so Jordi Fuentes had 2 questions, and I'm going to combine them. So the question is, why is Kingman only recharging a portion of their treated wastewater? And is there an estimate of cost for the project next to the Kingman High School?
Yes, yeah, good questions. And of course, the city of Kingman is considering recharging all of their wastewater. In fact, that's their plan. But it's just the first step that they did so far. And the cost of the project was like $1.6 million. So that's a fairly costly project. I think they're waiting for funding. The other question is the estimate of cost for the project next to the Kingman High School. Yes, I actually, the storm water that they plan to put in along Bank Street, that was over $1 million. So what we could do, we could certainly do something for less than that, put in a detention basin, and then the high school could turn it into a ball fields or a park, and then we would need dry wells, and so we could certainly do it for quite a bit less than $1 million, or in the same range if we want to be more effective, like somebody asked before, that we don't want to leave it there for too long for evaporation. So just we can do if you put in more dry wells, then it's more rapid this recharge. So it's in the range of $1 million.
Chuck Podolak has a question.
Yeah, thanks. Super exciting, and I think the whole idea of using some of this water, which would otherwise evaporate, is a great idea. Keith, looks like I appreciate all the sort of research and background you've done on this, and Nick, a lot of the on the ground examples. Nick brought up the regulations and state laws, and I wonder, Keith, if you found, are there engineering ways or are there best practices to ensure that what's being captured is water which would otherwise evaporate, and you're not having an impact on farms, ranches, towns who rely on the surface water downstream? So can we let the surface water go and focus these on water that would otherwise evaporate? Like how do you do this in a net positive way, so you're not, you protect those existing uses downstream?
Well, when I originally had these discussions with Director Bashatsky, we explicitly both agreed that we're just going to talk about wet water. We're both very well aware of all the other facets, institutional, legal, there's many other facets. So really my part of all this is really just to focus on the wet water. Is it physical? Is it physically feasible? And what areas potentially could benefit from it? So some areas might very well be already maxed out. They might already be doing a good job, or there might not be ways to get the water in the ground. So again, my background in all this is relatively limited. I'm pretty much just the regional scale groundwater flow modeler who adjusts the dials and has to ingest all these overdrafts. And so that's sort of the extent of my participation. I probably did not fulfill answering your questions, so I guess I just end, and I'm just looking at the physical attributes and is it feasible or not, a very preliminary investigation. But much more than that, I'm not the person to be asking those questions to.
Well, I think that'll certainly come up. That's something that, Ron, to your point, that I'd love to work with John Munderloh and the folks up there.
Yes.
think there's a way to do this to capture the water evaporation, but still make sure that everyone
Right.
is relying on the stream flow, that it's a net benefit to the system,
Right, it is.
even to the stream flow and the groundwater.
Right.
Thank you.
May I add something?
Oh yeah. Go.
So, yeah, so you need to really look at if there is any surface water claims there at all. In our area, the farmers don't mind the recharge projects. In fact, they want to do it on their own. They want to do these basins. We talked with several of them that the water just runs out and then runs out on Red Lake and then just evaporates there. And it happened many times. But if they capture it on their own property with these basins, then they benefit from it. So they want to do it on their own. So we have to look at if there is any surface water claim. And in our basin, luckily, there's not too many. There's very minimal. And then also there are flood control regulations, of course, and these are federal regulations that stormwater, for new developments needs to be detained. And so we, like I pointed out in some of the project examples, we tapping into those that already detention basins there, instead of just letting it evaporate. So we just recharge it. So this is just from a practical standpoint.
Representatives Griffin and Jamie, I have just after 11:20. Do we want to continue with questions or move on to the next agenda item and note the questions for a later answer?
But I just want to make a comment that a lot of good information, and I've been throwing out the figure of 95% evaporation, and if we can save another 5%, by all means, let's see what we can do to do that. The department is working on a flyer or a questionnaire of areas within the state, according to that bill that I did several years ago. And I asked to identify 6 or 7 locations for recharge on state trust lands, and we now have over 300 locations throughout the state that we could look at. And then these information brochure, I guess, will identify a location, the types of soils and things that you might run into, and what you can and cannot do or expect or not expect unintended consequences. But I think that's about ready to, I think that's in Wade's subcommittee. That might be pretty close to being released. So there are other things that we are working on that fall right into place with these presentations. So thank you very much for presentations.
Thank you, Representative Griffin. I am going to put a link in the chat to the storage report that you just referenced, and we are getting closer and closer to completing the guide that can be used alongside that storage site report, which the link will be in the chat. So thank you.
Great. You bet. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, gentlemen, but I believe we should move on to the next agenda item. So if Jenna, if you can note the questions that weren't answered and respond to them, we would appreciate it.
Certainly, I will direct them to where they need to go.
And I've misplaced my agenda item, but I believe the next agenda item is a discussion of the committee's goals.
Right.
I requested this item be on the agenda. I'm concerned that there's a level of frustration building among members about the perceived lack of progress by this committee, and in particular, a lack of discussion on groundwater concerns and possible solutions. This committee is it's an ad hoc committee to the Governor's Water Augmentation, Innovation, and Conservation Council. That council charged this committee with the duty to discuss groundwater outside of AMAs and make recommendations for solutions. The council even went so far as to give us a list of topics to consider. Again, that list was posted with the meeting materials for today. Goal number 1 was to achieve an understanding of groundwater in Arizona, and I think we've accomplished that. We've had some awesome presentations by DWR and Nick Hunt today. I certainly know more about groundwater today than I did when we first started. I think it's time for the committee to start discussing groundwater issues outside of AMA and possible actions to address those issues. Again, we're simply a recommending body. Our duty, our task is to identify some possible solutions and report back to council. Our goal number 2 is somewhat limiting. I don't think we should limit our discussion to what falls within number 2, especially given goal D, the further discussion, recommendation of issues that may be brought forward. I think we have a choice to make today. We can work on restating the goals, or we can open the door for the discussion of the topics that we were directed to consider by council under goal D, keeping in mind goal B as we formulate recommendations. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Representative Griffin, and then we'll open it for discussion among the committee members.
I think voluntary alternatives, I think, is still on track. We have several areas. In fact, the Wilcox area is several groups are exploring water improvement district. In Safford, they have, in fact, one of the things that were identified was the loss of water leaks, water companies and leaks. Safford has developed a system that has an alert if there's a water leak. And I think the figure that was thrown out in our committees were 10% water leaks. And if we can address those are all things that can be done involuntarily, and working with the cities and water companies that with the funding that we have, we could address. And I think that's what we need to look at voluntarily to take care of those issues. So we still have a lot of things that we can do voluntarily before we do any mandates.
I appreciate your sentiment, but it's getting those ideas out into the forum that I'm looking to do.
And we can make a list of those and start working on them. I can get information from Safford and other areas of concern.
That would be great. We can add them. I think we have an obligation as an ad hoc committee of the council to address the topics that the council has directed us to. And right now, I think I'm going to recognize Kathy Ferris, and then Ron Doba and Chris Custis, in that order, please.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I appreciate this agenda item. I am a member of the Governor's Council, and I speak in that capacity. According to the Department of Water Resources, in 2015, water users pumped about 240,000 acre-feet of groundwater in the Wilcox Basin. That's 4 times more than the basin gets in recharge. It's also 40,000 acre-feet more than was used by all the M&I users in the Tucson AMA in 2019. That gives you some perspective on that groundwater use. Between 1940 and 2015, extensive pumping removed 6.2 million acre-feet, lowering the aquifer by 200 to 300 feet. And additional wells, some 407 of them, have been drilled since 2015. Small domestic well owners cannot compete with these industrial-sized wells and dropping groundwater levels. They can't afford to deepen their wells, and they are stressed about their futures. Similar things are happening elsewhere. In the Kingman area, we just heard that water demand for agriculture is projected to increase to 100,000 acre-feet in 10 years. and the water level will keep dropping, and enhanced recharge will not stop that decline. And natural recharge is only about 5,700 acre feet a year. And already the water table is 400 to 500 feet below land surface. And in Yavapai County, continued groundwater use and the drilling of new wells are threatening the Verde River. These are just some of the things that we are reading and hearing about all the time. And it is really important for us to understand that groundwater is a public resource. It is owned by us, by the state of Arizona, by the public at large, and the state has an obligation to protect it for today and tomorrow. It's a finite resource that cannot be easily replaced, and homeowners and small well owners and water providers in these areas outside of the AMAs are counting on us. They are looking for help. And so as a member of the Governor's Council, I think we have a duty to delve into potential solutions to these problems. I don't think they can all be voluntary solutions. That is always lovely, but it has been shown not to work in many situations. So we need to look at these things hard. Ignoring them is not an option. And I agree with you, Madam Co-Chair, that we need to start looking at these issues, and we need to look at things that have been introduced already as potential solutions, like changing our statutes that allow for creation of subsequent irrigation non-expansion areas, like looking at rural management areas, like looking at future active management areas, like measuring of groundwater withdrawals. There have been many bills introduced in the past that we could easily take a look at and see what we think of. So I totally support moving forward in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Kathy for her comments, and it would be very easy for me just to say ditto with regards to my concerns about groundwater pumping outside of the AMAs. Being as we're talking about item B on there that addresses the voluntary alternatives, I think the voluntary alternatives are terrific. Although we haven't really, in the time our committee has been together, we haven't really done anything with that with regards to identifying them and a process on how we're going to get those alternatives out to the people who have to voluntarily adopt them to make any reduction in their groundwater pumping. I'd like to see us move forward stronger on that. But I do agree that voluntary alternatives are not going to solve all of our problems outside of the active management areas with regards to groundwater pumping. It's unfortunate, but with some of the deficits that we're seeing, as severe as they are, I really think that we may have to take on looking at the possibility of something that's got a little more teeth in it if we're ever going to solve that problem. But really, with regards to B, that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you, Ron. Chris?
Hello, morning, Madam Co-Chair. Hi, everybody. Chris Pesdith. I'm representing the Water for Arizona Coalition, a collective of 5 conservation organizations with about 60,000 members across the state in every county. And want to say we appreciate the discussions that this committee has had to date. The presentations today were very informative. With that said, moving forward, our coalition believes that rural Arizona communities should be empowered with more management and planning tools and authorities than they currently have right now in order to protect their groundwater resources for future generations and to maintain their economies and way of life for the long run. Ultimately, ensuring groundwater availability for the long term and empowering communities to plan for their water future is economic security. And so that is why our coalition thinks the rural management area concept is worth a deeper discussion. And in the spirit of Committee Goal D, we'd like to put forward the idea of the rural management area concept being on a future agenda item. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next, Mayor Miles. Are you there, Mayor Miles?
I can see that Mayor Miles is unmuted, but she is not coming through.
Oh. Was that just Mayor Miles or somebody else besides Jenna?
Can you hear me? Not coming through.
We
Yes,
can hear you now.
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, this is Jen Miles. I want to thank you for the discussion today and especially shout out to Nick Hunt. He has been a fabulous leader for us in Mojave County. Are you still hearing me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am, I'm here. I just unmuted.
Okay, just a shout out to you. I want to endorse and support the concepts of the rural management area and also well, that is just so needed in our area. As you can tell from Nick Hunt's discussion, we are doing everything that we can as a city and a county to conserve water and to make it sustainable for our future. But we need, for this wonderful model that's been created, a lot of input from the agricultural users and our industrial users, but we're collecting that. But there is pushback. We need a forum for discussion of groundwater issues ongoing. That is a prescribed forum. And that's where an RMA could really help us move forward the dialogue and the understanding of what's going on in our aquifer for years to come. We really need that as part of a legislative solution. The other thing I did hear mentioned was the amendments regarding the INA. And since we are creating, and I think Mojave is not the only one that is creating these very excellent modeling techniques, we should be able to make decisions, or the Department of Water Resources should be able to make decisions based on the future use, projected use of water, as long as it is based on good data going in, rather than wait until we have a critical situation to try to address it and when the time becomes critical. So I just wanted to go on record saying how important it is to us in this part of Arizona to have these considerations for the RMA and the INA in order for us to continue making the progress that we are proud we've been able to make a lot, but we have much more to do in order to conserve for our citizens future groundwater. So thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you. I think Ron Doba would like to make another comment.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I wasn't ready for it yet. There was a couple of people ahead of me, but I'll go ahead. I just want to speak with regards to the RMA and the INA proposed legislation. I think that really it's something that this committee should be looking at in depth and receiving comments on and input on. I mean, this is what we're involved in, is groundwater outside of active management areas, and these two proposed pieces of legislation fall right in line with those. My understanding was that our role as a committee would be to be making recommendations to the full GWAC, and certainly those types of recommendations could be a result of looking at bills like this, and a recommendation of supporting it or not supporting these pieces of legislation. But I think this is the venue that we have here where we should be talking about things like that. Unfortunately, I don't know how much time we have with the session, the next session coming up to really spend time and get input on it. But I would like to see that. I would like to see that happen. I think that's one of the things that we're about here. Thank you.
Thank you. And the comment ahead of Ron that I missed was from Mr. Bills. He said, Secretary Babbitt at the recent AHS Annual Symposium very eloquently described the issues of groundwater pumping in rural areas and argued for a bottom-up solution to many of these problems, in parentheses, RMA. His talk was recorded and is available at the AHS website. And Jeff Cross, would you like to make a comment or that your comment be read?
Feel free to just read the comment, Jamie, but what Mayor Miles said echoes what Mojave County also thinks.
Okay, Jeff Cross put in, Mojave County also supports looking at the rural management area concept. We have basins at risk and need new tools and more flexibility than currently available to protect those basins. We would like to have the RMA concept brought up at a future meeting. And I believe Senator Antondo would like to make a comment.
Hi, first of all, hello, everybody. My apologies for joining in late. I was in another meeting actually with Buckeye discussing water. I just want to support what Kathy Ferris had discussed. I can tell you that even some of the bills that were presented at the legislature that never saw the light of day, some of them even my district may support or may not support. What I think is important is that this committee discusses all of the difficult issues, not just the voluntary issues. As Chris Udall, I saw just jumped in, the water vetting forum, but I also think it's important that even if some of these bills do not get a hearing in a committee, it's really important that they get an informational hearing to bring forth stakeholders and experts in the field to discuss this at the legislature. We may not have time to move on any of these items going into next session, but it's important that they're brought forth not only by this committee, but also to the public as an informational hearing at the legislature. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Antondo. And Cole Libera has put in the post that La Paz supports Mojave County's comment and not skipping anybody, but Chris Udall put in about the vetting forum for water. The RMA is going to be discussed on November 2nd. And Kathy Ferris would like to make another comment and then we'll talk about future meeting dates. Kathy?
So I realize that getting this full committee together has been an issue, and the space between meetings has been a really long time, and I understand how busy everybody is, and including the co-chairs. But perhaps if that is a problem and we want to be able to make some recommendations sooner rather than later to the council, we should consider creating a subcommittee of this committee to really explore these things that everybody has brought out today. Thanks.
Thank you.
I might add, Jamie, along with these other comments that are made, I will be making a list of all things that we can do voluntarily before we get to any mandates. And so there is a lot of things that, for instance, we did a bill a few years ago that allowed a fund to be created that allowed people that could not deepen their wells to be able to tap into this fund to either deepen their well or replumb their house for a water delivery system. And throughout Arizona, Scottsdale has water delivery systems, so it's not something that's unusual. So I'm going to make a list of all the things, and if anybody else has things that are available in their community, please let me know. We'll make a list of all the things that people can do to voluntarily take care of their own water issues. And Wilcox, several groups are meeting over there to address their issue and coming up with solutions. So,
Great.
and I don't have a problem with meeting quarterly, as long as when we're in session, it's on a Friday. That won't be a problem.
I think we'll be able to work with that. DWR's has additional staff to make it a little bit easier. I would propose that we look to the topic list from the council, and the first item is groundwater management strategies. And I would suggest that we devote the next meeting to irrigation non-expansion areas, the evaluation of INAs and potential modifications, and the rural management areas. I'm not sure that we want to expand out the agenda more than that if we're to have full discussions on it. Because also under there were water adequacy requirements. But I think we might just want to look at management authorities or strategies first. Any comments on that? I will deem silence as acquiescence.
I have a quick question, Jamie. This is Lisa Otondo again.
Okay, go ahead.
It was just suggested a subcommittee. I think that might be a great idea, and I'd like to hear if there's any other folks who are supportive of that, to look at some of the more difficult topics.
So a subcommittee is going to have a subcommittee?
Possibly.
Yes.
Madam Co-Chair.
Yes, Mr. Dova.
I would support a subcommittee as long as we could focus on some of these items and help them move along at a little faster pace. I also support the quarterly meetings. If we could go to that, I think it would be a big improvement. Certainly, I recognize Representative Griffin's busy schedule, especially when the legislature's in session. But I would certainly like to see us get together more than once a year.
Thank you. And we have Mr. Dunham and then Mr. Custis.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, just very quick comment that I think before we dive headlong into trying to create a bunch of new authorities, there are existing authorities out there, both the INA that has been pointed out, as well as the subsequent AMAs that can be formed, and they don't necessarily, for the AMAs, have to have the same safe yield goal. They were set up in the groundwater code to have various management goals that could be tailored specifically to the area. And I would point out, like the Santa Cruz AMA is completely different than, the Phoenix and Tucson. So maybe before we rush out to create a whole bunch of new authorities, let's take a quick look at what we already are in existence, and maybe there's some slight tweaks to those kinds of things as well. Thank you.
And one last comment. There isn't anybody, I don't think, that's on this committee, that's on today's meeting from the agriculture community or the mining or any of the other natural resource industries. So they need to be included in anything that we do.
I agree with that. And I believe Sandy Fabritz was on earlier. I'm trying to track the comments. I think Mr. Custis would like to make another comment.
Sure, really quick. Just want to express Water for Arizona Coalition support of the proposed future agenda of looking at INAs and RMAs. Then also just one thought, want to share that perhaps rather than the sort of black and white distinction between voluntary and mandates, perhaps considering ideas like the RMA concept more in the category of expanding the toolbox, expanding the options that rural communities have in order to plan for their water future, because currently those options and tools are very, very limited. So I just wanted to offer that thought. But thank you very much for the opportunity to speak again.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize one more, and I think it might be Spencer Camps, but I'm not sure. It's Camps S.
Yeah, that's Spencer Camps from the Home Builders Association of Central Arizona. I just wanted to quickly say I agree with Doug Dunham's comments that we need deeper dive into the current tools that are out there. But as it relates to a subcommittee, I don't support that idea. I think we're looking at we're going to have a discussion about new tools, new potential kind of issues out there in rural Arizona, and rural Arizona is very diverse. So I think this committee as a whole ought to review that conversation together rather than a subcommittee. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I think out of respect to everybody's time, we have 9 minutes left, and I would like to say at the next meeting, we'll take up, no subcommittee at this point, we can pick it up, that topic at the next meeting if we don't make enough progress. I would like the committee to look at irrigation non-expansion areas, maybe the subsequent AMAs that Doug Dunham was referring to, and certainly the RMAs. You all know I'm from Mojave County. Mojave County's been talking about RMAs for a couple of years now. I'd like to see that discussion move forward. So Jenna, can you give us a couple of dates that are like within the next, before the end of the year, that we might be able to meet?
Yes. So December 2nd is a date that we have available, and December 9th as well. I'm going to preface December 9th that for those who are on and part of the council, that was our final council date, and we have moved that to November 30th. I will be sending out an email announcing that change of date, but just so that that doesn't raise thoughts in your mind that we would be conflicting with the council. So December 2nd and December 9th are two dates that are available. And if there's not time in December, I also have a couple days in early January as well.
If it works for everybody, I would prefer one of the two December dates.
I'll have to check and get back to you. I got a couple things on both of those dates, so I'll have to check.
What are the January dates, just in case? Do you have your calendar, Representative Griffin? Would you be able to say whether the January dates were available?
I don't have my assistant is out right now, so I don't have that right now. So let's I'll check it today and get back with you.
That would be great. What are the two an early January possibility date?
The early January is January 4th and January 6th. And co-chairs, I will send those 4 dates I just listed to both of you so that you have them in writing and can let me know if those work. And Representative Griffin, earlier you said that Fridays might be better for you. I always look at Tuesdays and Thursdays just out of habit, but I can look at some Fridays as well if that works better for you. That's certainly an option.
We won't be in session until the 10th of January.
Okay, so the Tuesdays and Thursdays work for now.
Before, I should be here the whole week before, so, but let me, after the 10th, it will need to be on a Friday.
Okay, excellent. I've got that noted, and I will send these 4 dates out to both of you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So if you'll check your calendar and respond back, Representative Griffin. Jenna, it's my preference that we send a notice to everybody before the end of the week as to what the next meeting date is, because December will come quickly, and I think it should be if it fits in Representative Griffin's schedule, it should be a December meeting, so that whatever input, if some legislation is introduced, that we would have meaningful and timely input? You know, the input.
Sure, I can send out a meeting announcement on Friday if you both are able to get back to me, you know, by end of day or even early tomorrow morning.
I can get back right now. I can make each of those dates work.
Okay, I'll have to get back to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Representative Griffin.
You bet.
I think we've covered everything and we have 5 minutes to spare. Is there anything else anybody has a burning desire to discuss, or are we good to go? Looking forward to the next discussions at the next meeting.
All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you.